Okay, well, welcome everyone to today's webinar titled Banking Beyond Borders, Navigating the Connectivity Era. This is Brian from Strategic Treasurer, and we're pleased you could join us as we discuss the changing dynamics of global connectivity in the banking industry. Our speakers for today are Mark O'Toole, Head of Sales and Partnerships in the Americas at Fides, Philip Anklin, Chief Growth Officer at Fides, Tony Krabill, Vice President Treasurer at Greif, and Craig Jeffery, Founder and Managing Partner of Strategic Treasurer. Welcome, Mark, Philip, Tony, and Craig, and I'll now turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's good to be here, and I'll just say a warm welcome to Philip and Tony, as well as Mark. Thanks for being part of this webinar. I know there's a lot of good content. Thanks for joining. Yeah, also, everyone, thank you for spending some time. I know you've got a lot of things to do. Everyone's got a full plate, so the fact that you chose to spend an hour with us is encouraging. So today, our topics of discussion are laid out on the screen in those nice rectangles with the colorful icons or chevrons. So here's what we're going to talk about: the complexity, the complex situation regarding payments and banks for information aggregation and treasury payments and payment hubs. What's going on? Why is it becoming so complex for organizations as they become more global, as they grow, as new payment types emerge, as they have to support multiple back-end systems? So complexity is increasing. Most organizations are highly complex to hyper complex. And so this creates some additional challenges that need to be solved. And so we'll cover some of the background for that. Many of you will be experiencing that. Then we'll look at connections between parties. How do we make connections between different entities to provide messages, to move funds, and to manage that activity? And this includes things like formats, as well as connection types, from APIs to host to dealing with networks. Then we'll look at some of the implications around cross-border transactions. These tend to cause quite a bit of pain, consternation, and phone calls to find out where's the payment, why hasn't it been received, let's trace it, let's figure out what goes on, and how that is, how some of the solutions that are coming out make it easier to handle this over time and easier to execute payments, since many organizations are dealing with significant volumes of cross-border activities. On the communication front, when we talk about data handoffs versus a platform, the concept of a payment platform versus payment messaging, where messages are passed from one party, maybe altered, passed to the next, all the way through, that becomes more complex the more parties that are involved. And so we'll look at a payment platform, perhaps using the Swift GPI concept, where messages can be seen by parties, they can be adapted and adjusted. And so that type of concept will be discussed. Then finally, or not finally, next to finally, the penultimate area will be customer experience. How are corporations looking to enhance and improve their experience with their trading partners? It should be efficient. It should work and support the business partners. And then we have 4 takeaways, and the 4 of us will spread those throughout our group. So thank you so much for joining. And we'll get into the first section. I'll give a bit of an intro for Tony. I'll ask you to jump in here. Nothing's getting simpler, or it seems very few things are getting simpler. There's more payment types. There's different methods of connecting. I'll say a few things about this and let you share what you'd like about complexity. On the left-hand side, you can see some statistics about what payment platforms do you use to deliver payments. You can see fairly new payment types like same-day ACH from a recent survey. 42% already use, another 3% are moving forward with using same-day ACH. So instead of an overnight process, daily process. A little less for BACS, faster payments in the UK, largely influenced by the audience participation, more heavily North American focused than UK focused. But you can see things like Swift GPT at 20%, real-time payments, 14% using that fairly new payment platform, with another 8% expected to use that. So this is you can continue to see this across the board as more payment types available, more people and companies using them. And then on the right-hand side, how are you connecting to make those payments? You're going into a portal, you're leveraging a network like Swift, using a secure file transfer process or APIs. What's going on? What are the plans to use? So, Tony, after that long-winded intro, I'll give you a chance to comment.
Yeah, thanks, Craig, and thanks for everyone for joining this morning. There are just so many different platforms and payment types and ways to connect to all those. As long as there are regulatory bodies, I think everyone on this call understands that complexity isn't going away anytime soon. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone here. As the owner of the bank relationships, as the treasurer, it's truly overwhelming for Treasury in a global company in particular to be able to manage all this on behalf of the various functions at the company, like AP or AR, for example. So as the treasurer, I take comfort in knowing that it is helpful to me that I only have to manage part of this complexity. If I can get my IT folks to output a file with the data that I need, not to jump straight into a commercial here for our sponsors, but I know that Fides can connect it and keep it connected. So a key advantage for me on the corporate side is this significantly cuts down on my budget needs for IT time, for IT maintenance, for example, for managing all those SFTP connections. And it also increases security. When I took over this, we had CSV files being emailed all around the place, for even things like payroll, but CSV files for vendors that the local business leaders would, upload into a portal and approve. My local business leaders don't even have portal access anymore. And if they do, for statutory reasons, they've likely forgotten their passwords, because now we have those direct connections, and all the SOX controls that go along with that can be concentrated down to better controlled systems and the testing. So we do have a couple stragglers still. It's never a perfect solution, but for the most part, by the end of next year, we'll have nearly all of our data that we send to or receive from banks flowing through Fides. So I'll just pause there and see if anyone else has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's interesting. The thing I'm zeroing in on is that right-hand usage. Web portal uploads, 75% of people are still logging into portals, which is fascinating, given, sure, there's a myriad of choices that, a company can make around how they're going to do connections. But the fact that so many people today are still using, a bag full of tokens to go in and essentially do a very manual process, made more complicated the bigger the company is, the more banks you have, the more regions you operate in. And now you're into sort of, spreadsheet hell, having to download your statements, consolidate those statements. It's a very manual process. It's very timely. Given that there are real world choices today, and as Tony says, how do I democratize and automate a lot of that process where I don't need to start to think about either different channels or different formats? I just want to be, what do I want as a treasurer? I want to get transparency into my liquidity, my cash balances. If I'm trying to do a 13-week forecast or longer term forecasting, I'd like to be able to have an ease of use and quickly surmise where my cash is and what currencies, and be able to work with that and become sort of more proactive with the data that I have, versus worrying about direct connections and building connections and down rabbit holes with the payments, which I know we'll talk a little about in a minute. But certainly lots of choices today that, with technology that is already readily available in the market, can be easily resolved with single connection points and automation.
Yeah, I would think at the end, I would just want to underline the complexity, because at the end, if you just look at that specific slide, there's so many abbreviations here that you as a treasurer mostly probably don't even know, right? I mean, and that already shows the complexity, because connectivity, bank connectivity, payments, it should, I mean, especially the bank connectivity part, that shouldn't be your core business. It shouldn't take too much time away of your core businesses. And this is exactly why there are providers in place like Fides who can help you overcome this complex situation, right? I mean, looking at that, there are channels, bank connectivity channels like host-to-host, EBIX, SWIFT, SFTP. On the other hand, you have like payment types. You have like a network. You have clearinghouses. So how do you want to manage this all by your own, right? And that just simply shows the complexity and the reason why we have this webinar, to give some kind of a educational view on this and how you can overcome this complexity.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for all the comments there. That brings us to poll question section number 1. This is a double stacked poll question. So there's 2 questions. If you go ahead and select all that apply in both of these are both multiple choice. So the top section is: we currently use the following methods of connecting to our banks. And the second one is: we plan to add the following methods of connecting to our banks. And I think it's fair if you have something, let's say you have host to host, but you're still going to add them, you can click on both areas. So if you have plans to add, go ahead and put those in. So select all that apply in both sections, and then go ahead and hit submit when you're done. Give everybody just a moment. There's also in the chat box, there's something about following Fides, following Greif, and following Strategic Treasurer. If you would go ahead and make sure you follow those companies, you can stay current and updated. And if you are interested in getting the poll results with the deck after it's sent in, please type the word either Fides, Greif, spelled correctly, not as grief, but Greif, or poll. Poll will work as well. So you've got any of those choices to type in. All right, so, and I guess we'll just go, and just to make things fun, because what says fun more than having 100 people type the word Fides, Greif, or poll in the chat box. That's the kind of fun we have in Treasury. Don't tell your friends. All right. I just love the engagement. Thank you. You guys are awesome on these webinars. It's quite fun to cover this material. We really appreciate you coming here. So I'm gonna leave this open to whoever would like to comment. You can see host to host is number 2, bank portals number 1 on the current method. Future method, it looks like the winning addition is APIs. Look at that. From 35% currently using to 49% expect to add. So that could be some overlap. That seems to be a key notable item. I know the bank portals entry or upload. Mark, I know you have some biases against that. Who would like to make some comments about this data?
I'll jump in. First of all, I guess that just validates and supports the previous slide there, where people are using manual efforts to do these things. And just looking at the bank portals, those last 2 combined still seems to make up the majority of how people are making those connections. Host to hosts, not surprising there, particularly if you're getting into bulk payments and things like that. I guess some of the questions around that are: how are people maintaining that today, and how are they scaling with those kind of solutions? APIs certainly are growing. I'm surprised at that number that's as high as it is, just given how few banks so far today have an API at all to be able to do some of these things. But certainly, it's a future state roadmap for where everything is going to go eventually. And I guess the main question there is how quickly banks get up to speed in providing APIs, particularly in payments where there's still a lack of standardization and whatnot, but certainly shows the promise. What does anybody else think?
Well, a quick public service announcement. If you don't see the poll results screen, it might be stuck behind your presentation screen or on your second or third monitor. So if you alt tab, you can probably locate and see what the results are live, but we will go ahead and send those out to everybody. but next person can jump in if there's any other comments.
Yeah, I mean,
I would say, oh, go ahead, Philip.
Tony, no, just please go ahead.
I was just going to say that from my perspective, the APIs I think can be really, really valuable until the business becomes more and more complex. So if you're able to deal with only one or maybe two banks for your total business, that's great. Greif has over 400 global bank accounts, so that number of APIs would not work for us. But I could see how it would definitely work if you had if you were able to manage your business with just a couple banks or maybe even only one.
Yeah, and I think it exactly shows in the moment in time we currently are, right? Because most of treasury operations still feel comfortable with the host-to-host, the direct connections, or even with the bank portals. And it's not really surprising me that we have such a high number of bank portals still. So when we have discussions with potential clients here at Fides, even big multinational corporates, they're surprisingly still working with logging into bank portals, downloading, merging into spreadsheets, sharing that all over the globe, etc. So that's not surprising me. And also in the to-be state where API is a big buzzword. In Europe, we have this regulation, PSD2, of course. There's a lot of talks about API, but it's not yet there, I would say, where it should be or where we would expect it to be, the technology. It's mainly about standardization and security mechanism, which is, and the target clients or the target types of an API currently. I would rather see it in the B2C area, so for retail or personal business, than really into B2B area, where I would rather say like corporate treasurers are rather like late followers, or they follow once they have security that it works well and the payment flows are protected. We are not yet there, but of course, that's the future state. Is it tomorrow? I doubt. Will it be in a few years? Probably yes.
Excellent. Yeah, that brings us over to connections. If someone from Fides would explain what we're showing here on this slide and how it applies.
Yeah, it shows a little bit what we have just seen as a result of the survey, right? I think most of many organizations are still rely on web portals for the daily payment and cash, daily operations and cash visibility. Of course, it involves a lot of manual processes. You need to handle tokens, you need to handle spreadsheets. There's prone to errors, and it can lead to inaccurate forecasts as well if you need to do that manually. If you're like a growing or a more mature treasury professional or treasury department, then at the very beginning you think of having a direct connection with the banks, especially in the AP area, which makes sense, of course, right? Because you can standardize the payment flows, the workflows. You can make them probably more secure, a bit quicker as well. But they also, quite often experience the challenge when it comes to that, with the direct connection. So every bank might have different requirement in terms of, again, like the encryption of payment files within that host-to-host connection, for example. And if you look at the broader scale, if you look globally, it's direct connections and only host-to-host. It's also about IBIX, for example, in Europe, something which is also probably not core within a treasury department. Or also when you look at how you need to involve IT resources in setting up those direct connections. Also, most of the corporates, they don't really have enough IT resources for such activities. And that's why it looks easy at the very beginning, but if you deep dive into it, the connection is only one thing, and what is being sent via this connection is a different thing as well. Because once you have this highway from your system to the bank system, that's one thing. But then what are you going to send via this highway to the bank? Is it like an XML pane 001, so the ISO standards? Is it a CSV file? Every pane 001, the payment type has different versions. Banks have different requirements, how to fill out or what kind of tags and data must be within which field, etc. So that's even increasing that whole complexity. And also in terms of what you need to do, you need extensive testing. You need to make sure that every single payment is properly tested with every single bank, etc. So it's connectivity I would say, like a niche area. At the very beginning, I guess corporates trying to do that by their own, because they think it's an offering by the bank, so it should work. But quite soon they notice it's not that easy. It's high maintenance costs as well. It needs a substantial allocation of IT resources. So yeah, at the end, it's essential for businesses to really question whether managing these complexities internally is their core focus, or if they could benefit from solutions like Fides that allow them to concentrate on what truly adds value to their operations.
Excellent. There's certainly more networks than SWIFT. We just put some examples. We put some payment associations like the Clearinghouse. There's more than that as well, as indicative or illustrative examples there. Now shifting onto systems and messaging, maybe Mark, you could lead us off here. As we think about back-end systems and companies that originate payments, to how those payments are communicated through messages and files.
Yeah, I guess it's no secret that companies are dealing with a diverse system landscape and an ecosystem internally, and so I think when companies can benefit from solutions that are system agnostic, and certainly as it relates to connectivity, it's one layer in every TMS system, for example, has some has to get that data in and needs to get data out, and where does that go? And so certainly going for a system where you don't have to rip and replace as you work with different systems, whether they be different ERPs or different TMSs, the idea that you can lay down those connections and they're good, and you can just direct them into where you need them to be, for whether it's your bank balance reporting or any of your sort of payment formats, is critically important, I think. With different systems in place, IT systems, you want to sort of reduce the lift for those teams that you may have. If you're lucky enough in Treasury, most people know just getting IT resources is a very painful process there. So the idea that you can, potentially outsource and have somebody else do those connectivity layers and provide that sort of single source of the truth, whether it's going into your ERP or out of your ERP over the rails into the banks, just focusing on a single connection would be excellent. But also getting, one of the areas, in AP, famously, they always struggle with getting reconciliation, and how do I get, I make a payment, and how am I getting a reconciliation on the transactions and what got paid, and getting a single version of the truth on that, and visibility and transparency into that is always a challenge. But I mean, from our perspective, whether it's you're initiating payments out of an ERP or you're initiating payments out of a TMS, the rails in all cases are important, and you want to have a scalable solution that goes across your entire banking landscape. So whether that's domestically or globally, just to simplify that process and build to scale. And then of course be able to, once you got something in like that, how do you administer that? Centralized user rights, payment rights, signatory rights, and things like that is important.
Mark, I could echo all of those things. Maybe just to reinforce one point, you mentioned the AP side. Our AP group has a robot that scrapes our database for discounts and payment dates, and that generates the file. And we've been able to set up with our AP team and IT and our banks that they have a dashboard that gets generated that shows all of those payments, even in a bulk payment file, what is released, what's partially released, what's rejected. We get those acknowledgements back from the bank at the payment level. So even a bulk payment file with 1,000 payments, if 999 were accepted, those will auto reconcile those 999. So the one stands out and can be actioned. And we also get an acknowledgement file throughout the process. So we can see, did the file fail getting to Fides? Did the file fail between Fides and the bank, which doesn't happen very often, if ever? Or did the bank get the file and it failed there? All those acknowledgements are able to be consumed by our ERP system.
Yeah, and one of the other things I forgot to mention, just conversions. Most of the time we come across customers who, can't produce an XML or a PAIN 001, and struggle with that, but they can produce some sort of file. And so how do you keep the business going? So the ability to be able to make those conversions, and specifically into a format that each of the banks will accept, becomes even more problematic for customers who want to be able to automate that and make those payments. And then we have, of course, upcoming ISO 222 requirements, which everybody's going to be hearing a lot more about, by next year. That we're already future-proofed on that side. But, you have a plethora of choices there in terms of tags. I mean, I think the last look at that was like there's 2,000 tag options on the XML format. So is this something that a company with limited resources and expertise and payment types, et cetera, wants to struggle with figuring out next year, how do I get ISO compliant and get things like that? So, I mean, companies like us, we're here to be able to help that kind of process of that.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, Greif has a very high level of maturity when it comes to communication within the systems, right? And that's, I think, the perfect foundation so that you can really, in a very short period of time, take the exact right decisions. And this is exactly the level where actually every corporate treasury should somewhere be, right? And if you start, and very much depending on the ERP and potentially TMS you're using at the moment, you might not be at that level. And then you will need to achieve that level. And this is also, of course, something that we can overcome with what you just said, Mark, with the conversion services, right? If you're working on out of some kind of an older ERP, which cannot yet produce the XML, the correct formats according to the bank specification, etc. I mean, don't worry, right? Because you have enough time to properly upgrade the ERP or the TMS, and we just take over the conversion services. So that you do, even if your system is still working, and that also shows probably in the next slide, Craig, if you could move over, because there you will see also that you might still using CSV files to send that payment data or collect data from the bank. And if the bank says, no, we need to stop that because CSV is not a standardized payment format anymore, and also in terms of regulation and how much data does the bank need for proper sanction screening, etc., we need to move up to the next level of format. And this is also exactly then the maturity level or the progress that you need to achieve with upgrading either your ERP or let us do that. We take over the format conversion, move that over to the bank, and you can buy somehow time to really upgrade your system. So that, I think that specifically is also what Mark just said in terms of the CBPR Plus initiative by Swift, where everything shall somewhere be on the new XML version. So there's some kind of a end date for the MTs for interbank yet, not for corporates, but for the interbank communication. And that just shows that this initiative is starting towards a more structured file processing or content of data. Just one example, the address, the structure of the address is much more sophisticated as it was before. So there needs to be much more details of the beneficiary and of the sender of that money, so that banks and regulators have the possibility to validate who is sending and who is receiving. And that's, yeah, the direction that we are currently in, and is of course something that is supported by the banks and the regulators. And ERP, TMS, and corporate treasurers, they need to adapt to these changes, and that's just adding additional complexity to that overall topic: connectivity, payment formats, what kind of data needs to be in which payment type, is it different from cross-border payments to local payments, etc. So it opens up a world of complexity where you as a treasurer not really want to have a detailed level of knowledge because it's just not your core business.
Yeah, some really good points there, Philip. One thing that I would draw people's eyes to as you look at the comma separated value or the delimited files, where you see the 3 red commas, and then the XML where you've got the tagging that it's all bracketed. The same information in this example, or roughly the same information, is shown in both formats, but the difference between the location telling you what something is, like the 3rd field here is the transaction amount, whereas the other one also comes with a tag that shows, if you can see my mouse, you can see it tells you what it is. And this is not exactly how it looks, but you can see descriptors can come in, and so the system can read what it is. So if a bank is providing more information, that can help other backend systems for reconciliation, for posting to receivables. And so that's an element too of the value of more better information if it comes through. Yeah. And that brings us to poll question section number 2. And again, it's double stacked because you can handle it. The first question is, our status of global payments is that we make payments in 11 or more countries, 5 to 10 countries, 2 to 4 countries, or 1 country. There's a single choice there. Second one is also a single choice. We plan to add payments to more countries in the next year. So this is a measure of complexity. Do you plan to add payments? Yes, no, or you're unsure. That'll just see what the traction and the volume is. And Brian is keeping a close eye on the poll, Greif, and Fides comments in the chat box, and will tell us when we've surpassed the number that we wanted. And then you can all rest easily in the chat box. All right. As soon as the poll questions, the responses come up, who would like to take first crack at this?
Yeah, I can sort of jump in. I mean, yeah, let's see the results here.
Here they are. Yep.
Okay, so I guess just summary results there. 34% of folks, the majority, seem to be doing cross-border global payments, and 37% plan to do some more in the next year or so. So interesting thing, and no doubt anybody that is contemplating cross-border payments, there's a lot of, they know that it's complex. There's some challenges around traceability, which is crucial for getting timely information on those payments. But you're also dealing with regulatory compliance. So depending on which countries you're doing, you need to have varying regulations you need to be cognizant of when doing that. You get into currency and currency transactions and the ability to maybe hedge, and you've got exposure to that. Payment delays, lack of transparency. Where is my payment in the process of that? One thing that's certainly come up in the last year and a half or so is just sanctions and OFAC screening. Huge importance there for companies that particularly are doing payments globally and are dealing with any of that, is to be able to, how do I make sure my payment isn't going to somebody where I'm either going to have the sanctions hit and have my bank frozen and the account shut down and face regulatory fines. So there's definitely a lot more complexity into just, it's not like just, hey, I'm going to make a wire payment to somebody in Ohio, but now I'm going to maybe make a payment to somebody in Azerbaijan. What does that mean for me? And am I in compliance? And can I see where that is in the process? And so there is a lot of considerations that go into being able to manage that nimbly.
Yeah, excellent. Tony, would you kick us off? We have a couple slides to go through what happens in cross-border transactions, where's the complexity, and then we'll move into the platform arena. What are some of the different approaches to it?
Sure. Well, referring back to that poll question, so Greif is in about 40 countries, and we'll be adding 2 to 4 more countries next year for treasury payments, not the AP side, but more the treasury focused payments. So it's probably not a surprise to most of the people on this call, but inside the US, we have pretty good visibility to payments and where they are in the process. But those cross-border payments, they basically disappear into the ether as far as I'm concerned. We don't have great visibility. And of course, that ends up escalating to us as Treasury when the money isn't where it's expected to be. So the AP folks, for example, have certain tools and certain abilities, but when they strike out, it ends up coming to us. And that leads to my team wasting time making calls to the bank, searching around portals. All that is time, and I can only imagine on the bank side how much time they waste between the relationship managers and everything else. It's just such an opportunity for everyone here, and this is maybe one of my biggest wish list items. Would be that we had a solution that we could use where we could really see where every payment is straight through the process, but today we don't.
Right, and then we'll move over to the next chart. There's I'll just do a quick setup. The top is kind of legacy messaging, where there's payment messages that move from a company through the bank, maybe through a network to a correspondent bank, ultimately all the way back to the receiver, let's say the vendor. And so you can see some of those handoff points. It's kind of like the old telephone game where there's a message communicated back and forth. The transaction platform below is showing, people are connecting to a single place to observe the transaction or to add information, to maybe make adjustments to it. An example of that might be Swift GPI. And if someone wants to pick up that from Fides and explain it in more detail and how we should think about data handoffs, platforms, and just messaging changes over time.
Well, certainly as you sort of look at the map, in a way you can see where controls may vary widely, who has rights to do all sorts of things. User management in each of those portals, do you know which employee has access to which bank and what can they do? Can they view, can they access, can they make payments? Is there sign-off rules that they can work with? Probably not. And so centralizing and administering that and making that audible and providing signature rights and thresholds and 4I's principles and audit logs and security controls, can be pretty complex, if not handled, appropriately. Also, what happens when, a new employee comes on board? Are they able to get in and see things? Can you control their rights and access to which banks, in which regions? And then, even if people leave for whatever reason, just doing deactivation, can you deactivate and get rid of the, how complex is that process for companies to manage?
Right, so we'll continue to move forward and shift to the implications of globalization. Like many organizations are in more countries. Tony gave the example of their Greif is in 41 countries. They're adding, I think, 2 or 3 more from just a treasury payments perspective. There's a lot of changes that and requirements that continue to grow. They never seem to shrink over time. So I'll turn that back over to Fides to help us out here.
Yeah, I take that over. We have seen what happened in the world, right? And how important it is that all the payments that are going through are correctly sanctioned and validated before they are sent to the bank. So in today's interconnected world, and we've just seen the results from the survey, you see how many payments are going cross-border to countries abroad. It's really crucial to be compliant with all these international sanctions and regulations. I mean, that's paramount. And therefore, sanction screening, it's which involves checking payment instructions against lists of sanctioned individuals and entities, has just become an integral part that you need to fulfill as a treasurer. And I think it's also quite difficult to be up to date when it comes to updated lists, up-to-date compliance, etc. So many institutions and corporations, of course, are now outsourcing this critical function to specialized providers like Fides. So we have the most updated lists. They're continuously updated to really ensure that whatever is leaving or whatever instruction from corporate is being sent to the bank is properly sanctioned and there is no reputational damage. And this is what it is all about, right? You want to protect the reputation and to safeguard it. And therefore, it's really essential that payment instructions are thoroughly screened and validated before they're being sent to the bank. The second part, the format lifespan, in the lower part of this of the slide, that goes a little bit into what I've just initially said in the area of CSV, for example, that is, of course, more and more going away. Also, these current message types from Swift, the MT101, for example, the traditional treasury payments, the high-value treasury payments, or also the MT940 that we all know as the account statements. They are being decommissioned sooner or later, because they're not delivering as much information as they should. Of course, they did when they were introduced at the time. I think it's decades ago, but they're quite old. But these days, they're just not having enough data within those files that you can properly reconcile on client's end. So you want to have as much information from the bank, as detailed as possible, so that you know exactly from whom did I get this payment, or to whom did I send this payment, so you can do reconciliation automated. That's a big benefit, of course. And on the other hand, you want to send, or you have to send, so much information within the payment file that it is accepted by the bank, not only for regulation, but also for all these corresponding banks with cross-border payments. Every country has its own specifications towards how a payment format should look like. So there's local specifications or bank specifications. There is country specifications. So the more countries you send your money to, the more complex it gets, because you need to have the right data at the right place in the right format. And therefore, whatever is currently known as the standard, like I said, the MT101 for treasury payments, MT940, is somewhere being replaced by the XML files, the ISO standard, because it just delivers enough, or it has a container where you can include all the data that is required to properly execute payments and to properly do reconciliation.
All right, that brings us to our third poll question slide. Those are up on the screen. I know there's a couple of people who aren't seeing the results, maybe can't find them. That may be from security settings, but they should be up. So it's double stack, it's single choice. Speed matters to us for payments in the following way. Yes, close to instant matters, so that's the quickest. Yes, quicker is important over time. In other words, moving faster it becomes more important over time. And no, there's not a need to go faster. Second is about detail. So information matters to us, or detail matters to us for information in the following way. Yes, more information is better and we can use it. Yes, more information is better and we want to be able to use it for AR, recon, treasury, etc. And then finally, a comment about the webinar chat. We have enough poll responses, so we're all good there. Save those for the next webinar if you would. That would be awesome. And then finally, no, we receive enough information for the foreseeable future. So this is about detail. And as soon as we get enough, Brian, let's pop that up. I'm just thinking about the time we've got quite a bit of good information to go over in a certain period of time. So quicker is important over time. Close to instant matters. I think those are probably driven by use cases. And then there's some comments about the information reporting. Who would like to make a comment or two before we move on?
Yeah, interesting results there. I'm not surprised that people aren't saying instant over, say, things like security and that kind of thing. But instant is great if you're, Uber, and you're trying to, distinguish yourselves by your ability to be able to pay somebody instantly, like an Uber driver or DoorDash or something like that. But certainly, from my experience, people, the quicker, more important over time, sure, as efficiencies improve or as more adoption of APIs would grow over time, you're going to get a lot of that efficiency and some more of that speed. But at all times, you've a fiduciary duty to protect the cash, protect your money, protect your payments, protect from fraud. So I would imagine, being able to do that is of paramount importance. in addition to, just being able to get better visibility, of course, into that, so you can get easy forecasting quicker at maybe creating a forecast by getting your actuals and things like that. But certainly when you think about fast, I mean, there's a lot of security considerations there that still being thought through and still happening today when we hear about hacks and things like that. Whereas with a file exchange, maybe takes a little bit longer today, but there's more correction possibilities and avoidance of some fraud implications. So there's definitely a business case for delayed payments, and companies like Uber can make an argument for that instant payment or TPE, I suppose.
Excellent. Tony, we're going to bring you back in. So what does what's on the treasurer's mind? What do you desire and need for speed, as well as some of these other areas? I can let me know if you want me to cover some of the stats on the bottom, or if you want to talk through the topic.
No, I can talk through the topic. I think
Okay.
For most treasurers, fast is good. But when it comes to payments, instant is usually not required. That, of course, depends on the industry and the use case. But when it comes to data, I do believe that faster, even instant, is important, at least for me, to maintain certain process flows and avoid inefficiencies. I don't want my people or people in accounts payable or accounts receivable, for example, sitting around unable to move on mentally from a somewhat menial task because they're tethered to waiting for a confirmation to come through, or performing a task that could be automated, for example. I want them to be able to get all the data they need instantly, shut that process down, and move on mentally. For example, within AP, if we solve for that complexity, then inefficiencies can be squeezed out of the system. So an AP analyst doesn't have to check to see if a payment was sent, or excuse me, check to see if a payment was sent. It's just pushed to the dashboard. They can mentally move on from that and do something more value added. Same thing for treasury. We're not sitting around waiting to find out if some payment was moved, if a debt repayment happens. If I always know where my cash is in real time, then cash positioning is never a distraction. I can just do it and then move on to something more higher value added, kind of like what's in that bottom right corner. That's, I think, where most people in treasury would prefer to spend their time.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I know you've already talked about some of the broader areas and needs. It's not just instant. Maybe things go faster. Any additional comments on this broader topic, Tony?
Not from me. I'm not sure if Fides had any other comments.
You mean on the customer on this slide here? I mean, here's what I hear all the time, particularly if it's, corporate treasurers are looking for a better user experience. They're looking for ease of use. They're looking for automation and transparency. So, if questions you would pose, I guess, is can I get my information in real time, to Tony's point there? Can I simplify my cash visibility and do more proactive liquidity management? Can I automate my entire banking landscape, with maybe just a single connection and not have to worry about all those point-to-points or portal sign-ons, etc.? Can I improve my operational efficiency so that other parts of the organization have that data in real time and can sort of speed up the things that they want to do on that side? Should I need to worry about validating data? Can I do forecasting quicker? And in order to do forecasting quicker, I need to get a better, at least initially, a better understanding of where my bank balances are, where's my cash today, so I can go into making key decisions around that. Can I reduce manual efforts and manual errors and things like that if I'm stuck on spreadsheets? And can I increase really the control around all of that? And I would posit that, those solutions in treasury aggregation are available today. And so when I see the poll results that a lot of people are still doing, a significant portion of some of this manually, that's great news. There are affordable solutions in the marketplace that can significantly improve your operations and the management of cash.
I mean, just to give some additional points here as well. I mean, at the end, it's just covering everything that you would like to achieve to be really efficient. I mean, from a customer's perspective, from a treasury perspective, enhancing the treasury experience. I mean, it revolves around simplifying processes, increasing efficiency, providing real-time, accurate information. This improvement is not only empowering treasurers to make good decisions, quick decisions, but of course also reduces the risk of it reduces the risks overall, and at the end also contributes to the financial well-being of the organization, because you know exactly what you have, what will be sent out, and based on that you can properly to make sure that your organization is well equipped at the right time with enough money. And if not, then you can take precautionary measures to make sure that it is well equipped with money.
Yeah, and Craig, actually, I will jump in on this slide. So,
Okay.
you know, at Greif, we have over, as I mentioned earlier, 400 bank accounts around the world. So I could speak to every one of these items on this slide, but you know, to us, we get that data fast. It's in rich text format, or excuse me, in a rich format. It's in a repeatable and a format that can generate automation and efficiency. The tools that we have allow us to use the data easily. Everything is connected, and instead of running the machine all day long, if you will, we're freed up to either just do the exception checks or perform higher value added activities, as I mentioned earlier. So, you know, to me, it's all of these we could spend a lot of time speaking to, but I think they're all important points.
Excellent. Well, that brings us to our takeaways. So these are the items that we wish to leave with you as a summary of some of the things that have been said. How do you bring these back to your particular situation? So let's go, Tony, and then we'll let the two gentlemen from Fides go, and I'll wrap it up with the checklist. So Tony.
Yeah, just to continue the thought from the previous slide, for example, I don't own AP, but I own making sure that AP has the ability to get what they want from the banks in terms of data, timeliness, etc. You know, that end-to-end process. I don't own IT, but I own making sure IT knows what the banks have to offer us. What used to be pie in the sky solutions, I'm getting old now, but you know, from earlier in my career, you know, these things were only for corporations that have large budgets, and those are just much more attainable today to get that end-to-end process automation. And you know, with the level of interest rates where they are and where they're going, the business case for making sure that your processes are efficient and your cash is controlled and concentrated, it's a much easier sell than it was 5 years ago.
Yeah, and in terms of the automation, I think at the end it's similar to what I just said previously. What you need the right system at the right time. So if you don't need the big ERP at the very beginning if you grow into a treasury world, so to say, or if your organization becomes or has a need of a treasury department. I mean, you just need at the very beginning visibility, and you need proper payment workflows, proper controls, proper user management, and that's the basis, right? And if you are growing into a situation where you think an ERP or even a TMS is beneficial for the corporates as well, then that's okay. I mean, if you, for example, have Fides as the aggregator of all that data, we can just plug and play with whatever ERP or TMS the client is using. So automation is key. Most of the time, treasury teams are rather small. They don't have that much people as typical AP ARs, and therefore they need to be very efficient, and I need to work with the right players in the market to really make sure that the processes are automated, the processes are under control, and yeah, the money is here at the right time and the right place.
Yeah, and I think, you know, from a payments perspective, you know, one of the laggards, if you like, to finance and treasuries is in the AP area. where people are continually doing direct connections or maintaining their own host to host. So if you're an organization that is getting into global payments or expanding, as people are this year, their bank landscape and opening up new accounts and new payable accounts and things like that, considerations around scalability. How do I scale that? Do I have the right team internally to continually maintain and build direct connections with the banks, or is this something I should outsource? Do I have enough expertise inside the organization that understands all the varying payment options and payment types and payment formats? And more importantly, if I'm doing those direct connections myself, do I know the formats that each of the banks that I'm banking with will accept? And so, that problem becomes exponentially larger as you grow. And so the positive question there would be, hey, should I need to worry about this at all? Can I outsource that? Or can I work with a treasury aggregator that, all now I need to worry about is one single connection, and then somebody else is taking care of any of the conversions, worrying about, ISO formatting and XML and PAIN 001. And all I need to worry about is, great, I've got a controls and security around that payment process, and I'm getting ACT files back, and I can see where my payments are.
Yeah, the last column here on the checklist, what the first one is identify what supports scalability. Do you have a team that can manage that? Modern tech, are you building it in every system? Do you use different types of providers to support scalability for payments, for information? How is that supported? So those are decisions that you want to make strategically and then on a detailed level. Second point there is, where are the options for removing defects and points of exposures? How do you eliminate? I think Tony gave an example of there were files, let's say even for payroll, that would go around in CSV files and loaded to a portal. Each of those types of activities represents a point of exposure. How do you remove those, right? So they're a point of exposure. They're also a point where defects and errors can occur. So thinking through the process, an automated process from end to end, allows you to remove many of those defects and the risk that you face from that exposure. And then finally, this last point, daily visibility and daily reconciliation is the new standard that needs to be automated. You need the information. Just like accountants will not tolerate you saying, let's do a cost benefit analysis on which accounts need to be reconciled. The cost of doing business in bank accounts is that you can see that information. You want to do it in an affordable manner, but you need to see it, just like you need to do at least a monthly reconciliation or a daily reconciliation from a treasury proof perspective. That's a cost of doing business. Given the increasing risk and the capabilities that exist, get that information. If you don't need it, you don't need the account. And so that should be a positional, the position that you take as an organization. It's a cost of doing business. It's commercially reasonable to do that. With that, we'll turn it back over to Brian. I want to thank Tony, Mark, and Philip very much for today's discussion. Everybody who's here, thank you for participating in the webinar. So over to you, Brian.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. The CTP credits, today's webinar slides, and a recording of today's webinar will be sent to you within 5 business days. And for more on bank connectivity, be sure to listen to the Treasury Update podcast, episode 239 with Fides, by clicking the link in the chat box. Thank you, and we hope you have a good rest of the day.